Hello. The working title for my pitch is called Transmutation, the theme of which is witches using transmutation magic to solve their various problems. The hook of transmutation is that the players must not only alter the size of their character, but also the size of their environment. Transmutation is a top-down 3D game in a similar vein as Bastion. The players will have to solve a series of progressively difficult puzzles where they must use their ability to alter the size of their environment as well as themselves to proceed. The first mechanic of transmutation we'll touch on is growing. Growing allows the player to increase the size of their player model, similar to Mario, and additionally, they can increase the size of objects placed in the levels, as well as specific pieces of the environment. This growth of the player will allow them to grab higher ledges that they cannot in their base form. Additionally, it will increase their strength, and the increase of environment will help them get to places they normally cannot reach. The increased strength the player will get from their growth ability will allow them to lift heavy objects that they cannot in their normal form. This will allow them to take objects from point A to point B. For instance, if they need to put a large boulder on a plate, this will allow them to do so. Now we move on to the second major mechanic of transmutation, which is shrinking. Shrinking functions very similar to the growing mechanic, except in the opposite respect. Instead of growing, it will reduce the size of all objects and characters it is used on. This will allow the player to get into spaces they cannot previously and allow them to interact with objects that are previously too large for them. Transmutation will have several obstacles for the player to overcome, the main being the puzzles they will need to solve, but the second being special barriers placed throughout the levels that will revert all of the changes the players have made. These will act similar to the barriers in Portal that revert all of the portals they have placed. For instance, if a brick is increased in size, it will revert it to its default size. Seen here is an example of a puzzle much lighter in the transmutation. The goal of the player is to take the large stone and place it in the end goal. Initially, the stone is far too high for the player to reach and much too heavy. Therefore, the player must shrink the pedestal that the stone is on, as well as the stone, and increase their size to get it down. Next, the player must shrink themselves and move it under the pedestals. After the player has gotten past the first two pedestals, they must place the stone on the third pedestal, which can be increased in size. This increase in size will take the player to higher ground as well as the stone. After which they must roll the stone across the platform and through one of the barriers. This barrier will revert the stone size as well as the player's. The stone will start rolling downhill, which the player must increase their size to prevent this, and push the stone over the edge into the goal. Initially, the goal of transmutation is to have around 50 levels. Of course, this can be changed to take into account time constraints as well as how fast players complete the levels. Additionally, 3 separate models will have to be made for all the interactable objects for all 3 sizes. This way, none of the textures on all of the models get stretched or shrunk. This way, they all look appealing to the eyes. Of course, my pitch has risks just like every other pitch. It comes with the obvious caveat that we're all relatively new to game design. Additional risks include the fact that it is a puzzle game, which takes time to test and make sure they're fun. It also comes with the risk that making 3 separate models might take a lot of time away from things that could be used better elsewhere.